Welcome to the Holy Post. Being a cultural Christian used to be an insult, but more people are embracing the label with pride. Today we unpack what's behind the growing affection for cultural Christianity and why it's more important than ever to embrace the weird, supernatural beliefs of the faith. Then historian Kristen Kobes Du Mez is back to discuss her new documentary, For Our Daughters, about the sexual abuse scandals that have shaken the faith of many in the church. She sees a link between the theology and culture that created these scandals and the rise of political idolatry within evangelicalism. Also this week, hurricanes are now political, and a Haitian pastor in New Hampshire with a sense of humor invites pets to his church. Remember, we've launched a series of HOLYPOST events all around the country this fall, and the next one is happening this Saturday, October 12th in Chicago. Phil, Caitlin, and I will be joined by Pastor Charlie Dates to record a live show that you can be a part of. And if you can't make that show in Chicago, there are a bunch of other HOLYPOST events happening in other parts of the country. All of them are brought to you by the Litvin Divinity School at Wheaton College. To learn more and to get tickets, go to holypost.com/events. All right, here is episode 638.
Hey there, welcome back to the HOLYPOST podcast. This is Phil Vischer. We are recording again, live, but not live to you, but we're live while we're recording from various places. I got Skye Jitani in downtown Wheaton, Illinois, epicenter of Northern evangelicalism. I got Caitlin Shess dialing in from a suburb of Denver, from a very cool-looking hotel room. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Phil.
Hi. We got Skye Jitani wearing a different hat that I've never seen before. Skye, tell us about your headgear.
I hadn't seen this before either. A couple weeks ago, I said to Holy Posters to send us your hats. Send us hats you want me to display. And we got our first hat. I don't even know who it came from, but it says, Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly, Micah 6:8, with a skyline and a cross.
Oh.
And apparently it represents some ministry in Philadelphia called the Philadelphia Project.
Oh.
It's awfully vague. It could either be a ministry or some secret military development project.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Like the Manhattan Project.
You know, I think I noticed Philadelphia was seeming to be a little more humble lately. That must be why. That's what's going on. It's a citywide humility exercise.
That's it.
Driven by headgear.
Thank you for the hat, everybody. We'll add it to the collection. Keep sending them in, and you will get your hat or
You're not even going to keep it on?
No, because it's not. It doesn't fit my head quite right. But I want to say this though. I do reserve the right not to display hats sent if I find them to be either inappropriate or I don't want to lend my scalp to them.
Yeah.
Oh.
So do you need to give people the dimensions of your head so they send ones that fit you better?
No, yeah, it's fine. It's just I haven't broken this one in.
You can't tell on YouTube, but Skye's head is approximately 4 feet in diameter. It is.
I'm worried they can tell on.
And now it's time for the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post.
And sometimes Caitlin.
Today's episode is sponsored by Sunday's Food for Dogs. We've been talking about Sunday's Food for Dogs for a while now, and I gotta say, our dog Keena really loves the stuff, and so do we. It's healthy dog food that's easy to store and serve, made from a short list of human-grade ingredients. Sunday's contains 90% meat, 10% superfoods, and 0% anything unhealthy or artificial. Unlike other fresh dog foods, Sunday's is air-dried, so it doesn't require refrigeration or prep. Folks who switch their dogs to Sunday's report softer fur, fresher breath, better energy, and more. Sunday's comes right to our door, so we never run out of dog food. Easy to store, easy to serve, good for your dog. And you can get 40% off your first order of Sunday's. Go to sundaysfordogs.com/holypost. That's sundaysfordogs.com/holypost. Or use code HOLYPOST at checkout for 40% off your first order.
You know that I'm a skeptic. I like things to have evidence, proof, data. I like to research things before I commit to them. And that even goes for my supplements. I want to know that they're high quality. That's why for the last year I've been drinking AG1. Unlike many supplement brands, AG1 conducts relentless testing to set the standard for purity and potency. I know I can trust what's in every scoop of AG1 because it's tested for 950 contaminants and banned substances, while the industry standard typically only tests for 10. AG1's ingredients are also heavily researched for efficacy and quality, and I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut health. So, if you want to replace your multivitamins and your digestive aids, your immune support into just one simple scoop, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 and K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription at drinkag1.com/holypost. That's drinkag1.com/holypost. Go check it out, and thanks to AG1 for sponsoring this episode.
Do you think it would be possible to disciple the culture solely through headgear? Just messages on hats.
Not solely. Not solely.
Solely. How far could we get? 80% of the way there?
Well, I think some politicians have proven you can get pretty far.
On headgear alone.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I don't know. I once watched a show that showed me how headgear can divide cities.
You did?
Mm-hmm.
What was that?
What show was that?
Oh, come on, Phil. Think about it.
Oh, are you talking VeggieTales?
Yes, I just watched that one like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I haven't watched that in a while. It was not the first thing. The story of Flibber Lou. Mm-hmm. One side of the town wears shoes on their heads. The other side of the town wears pots on their heads.
Pretty cute.
And they despise each other because of their differences in headwear.
Very reasonable.
Yeah. And, kids could handle it. They got it.
Yeah,
kids got it.
There was some discipling via headgear happening there.
Yeah. Do you know where I got the idea of the shoes on the heads thing? Which I had to come up with pots on the heads to just have something to contrast the shoes on the heads. Right. The shoes on the heads is from the classic Terry Gilliam movie, Brazil. If you've ever watched Brazil, it's a very bizarre...
No.
This is the second week in a row you've brought up a Terry Gilliam movie, Phil?
Yeah. I was greatly influenced by Terry Gilliam early in my filmmaking career. Anyway, it's a fictitious futuristic world, but bizarre. And it's stylish for women to wear hats that look like upside down, like high heel shoes. Yeah.
Okay.
Are you looking it up?
Well,
Caitlin?
yeah. And the first thing that came up when I put Brazil movie into Google, the next suggestion under it was Brazil movie shoe hat. So.
Oh, you're kidding me.
So I see it now. Yeah.
It's because Google's listening to me.
The leopard shoe hat.
Yeah. Anyway, you can Google it. They wore shoes as hats in Brazil, and Caitlin just grimaced. What image did you come up with?
Just someone's face is being torn off.
Oh, no, it's not being torn off. She's a doctor is demonstrating what he's going to accomplish with her next procedure. So he's stretching her face to see show her how much younger she's going to look.
Oh, you're right. That makes it so much less weird.
It's a bizarre film. It takes pot shots at the upper class, of course, which is one of Terry Gilliam's overarching themes. Do you know what he named his production company when he started producing films?
Not even a little bit.
He named his production company Poo Poo Productions.
And now it's time for news of the butt.
It's not time for news of the butt. He named his production company Poo Poo Productions. Do you know why he named his production company Poo Poo Productions?
I don't want to know.
Because he liked the idea of lawyers and accountants having to get together in conference rooms and say Poo Poo Productions. It was a gag
he sounds fun.
Against the professional class.
He actually does. I think that I concur with his instincts. I think that's funny.
It is funny. It is. Admit it, Caitlin. That's funny. You think it's funny.
I mean,
you think.
How can someone who likes working with children so much not find that a little
because
bit
you already
endearing.
get a lot of it. You can get sick of it. I think I'm going to hang out with adults. I'm not going to get any of that, and not with you two.
No, you are
this is
darn
true.
right, because there's a child in all of us that doesn't want to be throttled and told you can't think that's funny anymore.
Okay,
you
Right.
can't.
It's the Peter Pan kind of thing.
Yeah. Stay young, Caitlin. Stay young at heart.
Okay.
Stay young at heart, and that means you like poop jokes.
It doesn't have to mean that. I just don't think
Totally
it has
what
to
it
mean
means.
that. No.
There's no other way to stay young.
This has been the news of the butt.
Bring your pets to church, Haitian immigrant priest tells worshipers. I'm not going to eat them. I will bless them. I love this story. It's a good news story. It's churches doing good stuff. At St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Concord, New Hampshire. Do you know that's the capital of New Hampshire? In case you were ever traveling through New Hampshire and you want to say, where's the capital around here? You'd go to Concord. The Reverend Jean Beniste, a Haitian immigrant and Episcopal priest, turned internet curses into blessings during an annual blessing of the animals. I say, bring your pet, bring your dog and cat. I am Haitian and I am not going to eat them. Have you ever heard your pastor say that? Bring your pet, I'm not going to eat it.
No.
It goes on. It doesn't need to be said usually.
Usually it doesn't need to be said. I will bless them. I will embrace them. I will embrace you. I will make community with you, he said. So those gathered at St. Paul's for the annual blessing of the pets, which is a very interesting tradition, decided to turn one of Christianity's more lighthearted rituals, an annual blessing of animals, into an act of good-natured resistance. The Right Reverend Robert Hirschfield, Episcopal Bishop of New Hampshire. Does every state have an Episcopal bishop? Is there an Episcopal bishop of Illinois that I don't know about?
Probably.
I don't think it's
Right?
always individual states.
Yeah, I'm
Different
sure there's like
sizes?
regions
Yeah.
or something.
Oh, okay.
Probably.
Well, he said, our gathering of blessing instead of cursing can be seen as an act of resistance to a culture that is fomenting violence of thought, speech, and action. This is a way of turning the energy of the world on its head. Turning the world's energy upside down. Is that Christian? I don't know. Is that
Yeah,
Christian?
like putting shoes on your head.
Same. Yeah.
Let's turn this into a blessing rather than continuing with the vitriol. All right?
Have you guys ever been to a church that like blesses pets?
Yes.
like
I knew you
attended
would
one
have.
or been to one?
Yeah, like seen one of these.
Yeah.
I've never
pet
seen
blessings.
I've never seen a pet blessing in person.
I have seen a pet blessing in person once, and I remember at the time thinking like, oh yeah, this was like right beginning of seminary, and I still hadn't figured out like maybe I want to have an academic career. So I was still thinking about working in the church, and I was like, oh, this would be really fun. I mean, I'm not Anglican. I didn't think I would be, but like it'd be so nice to bless all these animals. And then someone walked in with a snake, and I was like, nope, done, not doing that.
I wonder. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be the officiant at a pet blessing in Florida. I
Yeah,
don't think.
that's
Because
no.
you just have no idea what's going to walk in the door.
I'm allergic to cats, so I would have trouble with the sneezing and the eye watering and all that with
Suffering
the
with
cats.
Christ, this guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Although I'm not sure pets need to be blessed because in most cases they bless us.
I think
Is my bias, but
Yeah. And I
All
think
God's
they are
creatures.
blessed.
I know. But that's what I'm saying. Like
Doesn't say they need
Well,
blessings.
can I say something else about this? That I really specifically love, not only, as you said, Phil, that this is like a joyful, creative, good story, but also what a beautiful example of someone responding to what's happening in the larger world, not with reinventing the wheel or thinking Christians need to come up with some brand new plan or idea, but saying like, what resources do we have in our history and our tradition that we already rely on for other things that just by the grace of God and the power of the Holy Spirit can be used to more directly confront what's happening here. Like I wish more often we thought like, what do we already do that is an answer to what's happening? So I really liked this.
I also appreciate that this pastor has a sense of humor. Like
Yeah.
he actually mocks in a way the ridiculous falsehood of Haitian immigrants eating pets. And in a way, by mocking it and making a little bit of fun, he defangs it, for lack of a better term. So I thought that was kind of
Yeah,
endearing.
like they had to do with the snake before he could bless it.
There you go.
What are the odds that there's a picture of him holding up a cat And then it's on social media, and then someone says, "Oh, the Haitian priests are calling for more pet donations for potlucks or something." I hope that doesn't happen, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if it did. Speaking of disinformation, we had a hurricane. I just wanted to bring this up because it's kind of crazy. The head of FEMA, the governor of North Carolina have all had to go on social media now to say stop the disinformation about the hurricane response and the delivery of, I can't tell you how many memes are circulating from, the far right. It's like we can't even look at a storm now without trying to figure out how we can use it to score points and dunk on, whoever the other side is. Like it's, it used to be if the storm hit New York City or San Francisco, we could dunk on the liberals by saying it's God judging them. But when the storm hits the Bible Belt, we have to come up with a new way to dunk on the liberals, which is, there's no money for the storm because they gave it all to immigrants, or, Kamala Harris is just handing out $750 a person, and that's all they're going to get, and they've lost everything, and it just won't stop. So we had the governor of Ohio who had to come out publicly to say, no, this is disinformation about Haitians living in Ohio. These things aren't happening. Now we have the governor of North Carolina having to come out and say, no, this is disinformation. The response, FEMA was there. The federal government was there. Rescues are happening. The money is available. The rumor went out that FEMA had run out of money, because the head of FEMA said that they would probably have to make another request for a new appropriation of funding from Congress for the rest of the hurricane season, because this hurricane was going to cost so much. And people took that and said, they're out of money. They're out of money. Why are they out of money? Because $600 million went to communities on the southern border. Why did $600 million go to communities on the southern border? Because there was a separate appropriation from Congress with a separate pot of money to help municipalities along the southern border handle the influx of immigrants, which has nothing to do with the funds that were appropriated by Congress for disaster relief. Completely separate funds.
So isn't this an example of exactly what I think a lot of Americans are exhausted by? Like there used to be a time when a national tragedy would unite the country, or when there was a crisis, a foreign policy crisis. There's that old saying that our politics stops at the waterfront, and we are all unified when it comes to international things. Whatever. Like the fact that everything now is pushed through this lens of partisanship and who are you against and who are you for. People are exhausted by it. And unfortunately, in this case, the people who are most vulnerable, the people who've been victims of this terrible tragedy in South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, this is hindering the help that they need to get, because people genuinely think there's a conspiracy going on with FEMA in all of this. And so you're re-victimizing the very Americans that you claim to be advocating for. And I'm exhausted by it. I can't imagine anyone else is happy with it, but it's just horrible.
Helene.
I think you're right, Sky, that it's gotten worse, but sometimes I also think we look back on some past national disasters with some slightly rosier views. Like people will point to
every natural disaster before this one. We got together, we had a worship service, and then we all went out and solved the problem.
I mean, it's like Katrina or 9/11, people will point to, and it's like there was something different there, but how quickly we were willing to find people to blame for sometimes slightly true reasons, but sometimes very often for wrong reasons, was still present then. I mean, I think part of what's hard about these particular kinds of things, and one of the reasons that we end up pushing so much blame on people who are not at all fault, is partially when they are completely outside of our control, right? We need to find some way to blame someone's choices instead of acknowledging that the world is broken and fallen and there are things that happen that are just completely outside of our control. Not to mention the other part of like climate change being involved in this, and we don't want to acknowledge larger systemic reasons that things happen, so we want it to be on a small enough scale that we can have someone to blame. But I think the other reason is just we want to believe not only that there is like some reason other than just like the chaos of the world or these really large problems like climate change that we can't solve, but we also want to believe like we tend to view our individual lives as well as our larger social lives as always being zero sum and always being a story of scarcity. And when you learn to interact that way on an individual level, you'll also act that way on a larger communal level. And it results in the kinds of things that you're seeing now. And you're definitely right that there's been a change, but I also think there's something just human happening here that has happened in lots of those disasters in the past too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like with Katrina, there was a lot of criticism of the George W. Bush administration and their failure to respond for things. And that's maybe not great either, but it's understandable. I think it's different when you're saying people in North Carolina are suffering in the wake of this horrific hurricane because of immigrants. Like, that's a whole different level of scapegoating. Who
you're blaming.
Which is
and how much power they have. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm hearing, I'm similar to Katrina, some of the complaints about the Katrina response was, well, these are poor African Americans. And so the U.S. government does not care about poor African Americans. And that's why they just weren't there for them. And in this case, what we're hearing is like, well, let's come up with a spin on that theme that can work for us. These are rural Christian white people. Of course, the federal government doesn't care about rural Christian white people. So that's why they didn't set up enough response, quickly enough. So everybody's spinning. Everybody's spinning to win points. And what if we just stopped spinning and just helped? What if because it's hard to help people when you just keep spinning around.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's like everything has to have a partisan blame to it. Like if Simone Biles didn't get enough gold medals in this Olympics, it's someone's fault. It's, it's because the woke liberals have made people soft and she didn't, try hard enough. Or like everything is blamed on some agenda these days. It's really getting annoying. And it's really getting exhausting.
To your point, Phil, part of what's happening is as long as I can blame someone else, especially an amorphous sense of someone else, like it's not usually even just like one individual, it's like this party or this administration or this, if I can do that and it's their fault and they're the ones that have to do something different to fix it, I don't have any responsibility to do anything about it. And some of the time you have no ability to. I mean, most of the people in America right now do not have a significant ability to change the massive problems that are happening in North Carolina and around where the hurricane hit. But even in smaller ways, like you could donate to, like there's incredible organizations doing a lot of work there to just like bring supplies, to make sure roads are clear, to try and bring electricity back, to make sure people have access to water, to try and get essential institutions up and running, especially like I have friends who are worried what this will do after their kids already faced a setback educationally from COVID, now are not in school because the buildings are not accessible and there's no electricity. And so it's like you could do something, you could donate some money to one of those organizations, and not everyone complaining about these big conspiracy theories isn't doing that. Maybe some of them are doing both, but I think sometimes the conspiracy theory is helpful because if you can say it's a problem of someone else and it's a problem that's kind of amorphous and evil and no one can really fix it, I'm absolved of any responsibility for doing anything about it.
And is that why you're not doing anything about it, Caitlin?
I am doing some things about it.
I noticed you just left town. You just hightailed it out of there as soon as things got rough.
To go to the Mile High City, the place least likely to get flooded.
Can't get me here, floodwaters.
I did not live in a place that was significantly hit, but I can provide you. I mean, I think maybe we should give some people some links to the organizations that I don't just know are good organizations generally, but like I have friends who live in areas that were really significantly affected that are watching people from those organizations actually show up and provide things. So on a first person basis can say they're doing good work. Here are the kinds of places that you should support.
Hey, let's do that. Let's put it in the show notes. Some places you can go to actually help support organizations that we know for a fact are on the ground doing good work. Okay, cool. Okay, we're not going to talk about anything partisan or political, have nothing to do with the upcoming election. This is what we're going to talk about next. Is cultural Christianity, after decades, nay, even centuries of decline, now on the rise? Our friend Michael Bird, who's a HOLYPOST pundit and writes frequently and very often entertainingly, wrote a piece last week about an article by Madeline Davies in the New Statesman, not familiar with that publication, I'm sure it's just fine, on the rise of cultural Christianity, that there's an increasing number of public intellectuals and commentators who identify as not just Christian, but specifically cultural Christian. Richard Dawkins, the most famous of the new atheists, is the most famous of the ones who have said, actually, I think I might be a cultural Christian and an atheist. But also Elon Musk has stated that he's a cultural Christian. Jordan Peterson of the Daily Wire and very famous manfluencer. Is that what he is? I don't know what he is. Nick Cave, Hersey Ali. And this was Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Do you know who that is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I had to look her up because I'm not as smart as you guys. Ayaan Hirsi Ali was born in Somalia, was raised as a Muslim. Father was imprisoned by the communists in Somalia when she was a child. They fled Somalia. I did a little research because I wanted to know, who is this person? She ended up in the Netherlands. She became a politician and a women's rights activist in the Netherlands, and then one of the leaders of the new atheist movement. As a strong critic of Islam and its treatment of women. Then she moved to the U.S. in the early 2000s as an activist and an author, and just last November announced that she had converted to Christianity, claiming that in her view, the Judeo-Christian tradition is the only answer to the problems of the modern world. We've got Elon Musk saying similar things. Richard Dawkins is not saying Christianity is the only solution to the problems of the modern world, but it was interesting with some of the new atheists because after 9/11, when the new atheist movement really ignited, it was largely a response to the fear of militant Islam and the notion that that's just what religious people do. That's just what religious people do. And what that led to was about 20 years of new atheists, Hitchens, Dawkins, Dennett, and some others, meeting and quite often engaging aggressively with Christians, and in some cases getting to know Christians because they were appearing on panels together to debate them, and in some cases actually hearing really good arguments for Christianity that they'd never heard before. And what it led to over about 10 or 15 years was a distinct break between, away from lumping all religions together. They just, for the most part, stopped doing it. And that has led even more so now. And there's books like Tom Holland's Dominion and a whole host of others that have said, actually, the unique beliefs of Christianity might be key to the liberal West and things we hold very dear, like individual rights and women's rights. And if we lose any connection to historic Christianity, how do we sustain that stuff? And so we have more and more people saying, actually, I think I'm going to be a Christian, but not a religious Christian, not one that believes the crazy stuff, but, that for our culture, and particularly to oppose like leftist extremism and rightist extremism, to oppose extremisms of either the progressive end or, fundamentalist Islam and other fundamentalisms, we need to hang on to the classic liberal tradition that we inherited from the church. Okay? You guys with me?
Yeah.
I know you're dazzled with the amount of information I just gave you.
Well, have you listened to
extemporaneously?
Have you listened to Justin Brierley's The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God? Because he's kind of charting all of this and talking to a lot of the folks that are referenced in this article and hearing firsthand from them what is going on.
Yeah, I do. It's interesting because in England, and this article, the one in the New Statesman, is from a British perspective. It's talking about the Church of England and the role of the Church of England and current figures in politics in the UK. And, do we believe, it really is questioning, is healthy liberal democracy just the default value of every human who's ever been born? Or is this something that actually went against the default values of most humans and was a gift of the church? And do we need to recognize that in some way? Tom Holland says that the church has been too successful. Christianity's gifts to the culture, rooted in belief in the fundamental equality of all, and including education, healthcare, and welfare, are no longer recognized as such as coming from Christianity. The future for the churches is to remind people where these ideas come from. They come from believing in mad things. His contention is that we need to hold on to the weirdness of Christianity and not try to neuter it down to just, a guide for successful civilization. The future for the churches is to remind people where the ideas come from. They come from believing in mad things, that there is a God who created all human beings equally, gave them an inherent dignity because they're created in God's image. It comes from the belief that these were taught by a guy who got nailed to a cross and then rose from the dead and offers the promise of eternal glory and life. These are obviously, objectively, to the rationalist perspective, mad things. But the madness is precisely what makes them so powerful and has made them so powerful. People want the supernatural. They want the strange.
Some do.
Some do, yeah. So Mike Bird says part of the church's public witness should be to show how Christianity is weird, to show how Christianity is otherworldly, and to show how liberal and secular values are rooted in Christianity. So then the core question that he was asking and Madeline Davies was asking is cultural Christianity better than no Christianity at all? And that's what I wanted to ask you guys.
Who's going to go
Sky.
first?
Because Michael Bird more or less says, in some ways, maybe, but it also has the danger of inoculating people against true Christianity if they're just accepting, a denatured version of it.
Okay. First of all, I think it's just interesting that it used to be considered an insult when you would say, so-and-so is just a cultural Christian. And now people are owning the label and seeing it as a positive, right? Whether it's Elon Musk or Jordan Peterson or whoever, Dawkins. To be a cultural Christian is basically to say, I like all of the cultural fruit and benefits of Christian faith, but I don't want to actually be accountable to investing or sacrificing anything as an actual Christian. So when getting to your question, Phil, or the question of the article, I would rather live in a society that's been deeply influenced by Christian values. I think that's better for everyone. I think it's better for the poor. It's better for the needy. It's better for minorities. It's better for women. It's better for everyone.
And I think you can pretty objectively look around the world and say, which countries would I most like to live in? And then also look around the world and say, where has Christianity left the deepest footprints? And there's going to be some crossover between those two groups.
So on that front, it's fine. It's good. Wonderful. I'm grateful for the influence of Christian tradition and history and belief systems in a culture. But I think what's more telling here is that for some people, as Christianity has been waning in its cultural influence, they feel like a resurgence of Christian influence in society, that in and of itself is a victory and the win that they're after, and they're content just to make their culture more Christian again. And I think what Mike Bird is saying, and maybe some others, is that shouldn't make us content as Christians, because what we want is the actual source, the head of that stream. What's it coming from? And it feels to me like some of these folks who are just advocates of cultural Christianity, it's kind of like saying we're in this automobile and it's run out of gas, but there is still momentum. It's still going down the road, and maybe it's even going downhill and picking up some speed, and that's great. And so we're thrilled with it, but they're naive to the fact that this engine is out of fuel. There's no gas in it. And the moment that hill starts turning upward again, you're not going to have the energy to get over it, because you don't have a critical mass of actual Christian belief, supernatural Christian belief that in past generations has driven those cultural engines and gotten us over various challenges. I'm stretching the metaphor.
Hill? What's the hill, Scott?
Well, I don't know what the hill's going to be, but like the hill at one point was slavery in the UK and in the colonies and in America, and it was a horrible evil, but there was enough Christian belief in our societies that it pushed us through that evil on the other side of abolition and got us over it. And I don't think that happens if it's just the residue of past Christian belief and not actual people believing in the supernatural power of Jesus alive in the world today. So that's my concern, is they want the fruit of this Christian tree, but they're neglecting the fact that you're not cultivating the soil and fertilizing the ground, and in time that tree is not going to produce the fruit that you've benefited from. Yeah. And it has to come from somewhere.
So you're saying we need more VeggieTales?
Exactly.
To fertilize the ground for the fruit to grow. Caitlin, help us out.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Sky. I think one of the distinctives here is not just, is it serious enough? Is it real enough? Is it, like you were saying, well fertilized and grown? It's also some of the weird parts that some of these folks are saying they're ambivalent about or even don't believe are central to the reason why you actually can sustain conviction about the other things. Like I was just in a conversation with someone recently who was like, I was talking about a church that had said pretty publicly, like, we don't really care about or believe in the resurrection of Jesus. And this person said, well, like, as long as they follow the Sermon on the Mount, like, that's what matters. And it was like, well, actually, those two things are related to each other. Like, the call of the Sermon on the Mount to live that way doesn't make any sense, and you will stop following it if you don't believe in the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Like, you can't separate those two things out. And when it comes to a lot of these folks, I agree with Sky. I would rather live in places, and I'm thankful to live in places that have been shaped by Christian ideas. I think that puts some more responsibility on us, which is where I might disagree with some of the stuff that Mike Bird said, that I really appreciate him bringing this article out, but I don't know that we can just return back to another time where we were strange and new and persecuted. We have some new challenges that come from being inheritors of a tradition that we have shaped. But one of the things that I think will really be maybe like the hill Sky was talking about, or where the rubber meets the road, is some of these folks that are saying, I want to be a proponent of cultural Christianity, and I want to stand against, I think in the article it said wokeism, or stand against Islam, or stand against like non-Western ideas. You can't stand against those ideas from a position of hypothetical Christian ideas without that ethic of, because of the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come, I'm willing to lose. I'm willing to die, actually. Like, the ethic can't be divorced from that deeply held belief that I can afford to lose something, actually. I can afford to lose this election. I can afford to lose my life. I can afford to lose my comfort or privileges because I know that this is not the end of the story. And it's nice hypothetically to think that you could divorce those ethics from that deep theological conviction. But what ends up happening is not the civil rights movement. Like, civil rights movement was rooted in, we can fight for justice with everything we have. We don't have to resort to fighting back with violence because we believe in the resurrection of the dead. You divorce that belief, you get violence. You get Christian nationalism. You get the forms of this that just say, we want the ideals and we'll use any means to get them, when the means really matter, and you can't sustain doing those means apart from these convictions.
It's a little bit like saying, we don't believe in fairies anymore, but the fairies had some really good teaching. So let's remember the teaching of the fairies as long as
apart from the magic.
Yes. Yeah. Because Michael Bird summarizes the other articles' summaries by saying this, that people are realizing, and this is why they're embracing cultural Christianity, people are realizing that Christianity and its worldview are a bulwark against both a caliphate and communism. So, Islamic extremism on the right and liberal woke extremism, progressive extremism on the left. The obvious question becomes, are we still fond of Christianity if communism wins, or if the bulwark doesn't hold? So we're holding up Christianity not because we love Christianity, not because we love Christ, but because we think it's a good shield. This whole belief system that we've rejected the progenitor of it, we think is a good shield against the things we don't like. What if we realize, actually, there's a more effective shield, which is our own form of totalitarianism?
And that's exactly what's happening. I think this is not a new phenomenon. This is, during the Cold War, we saw this. There was a resurgence of Christian rhetoric and symbolism and idealism, even in the United States. We added "In God We Trust" to the national motto and to our currency. We added one nation under God to the Pledge of Allegiance. All that happened in the 1950s during the Cold War because there was this popular belief that Christianity and cultural Christianity was a shield against the influence of communism. Was it actually deeply rooted in the weirdness of a belief in the resurrection of Jesus Christ and an encounter with him through his spirit that regenerated people's lives? Was that what was really behind those changes in our national rhetoric about faith and God? I don't know. I think it was a useful shield against a political fear we had. Yeah. And is it coincidence that almost the year the Cold War ended in 1991, you start seeing a decline in Christian influence in this country and church attendance, and it's been that way for over 30 years now. So
I was watching an online argument about the Crusades and whether the Crusades need to be reclassified as a good because they saved, well, at least the first one or two Crusades, stopped the advance of Islam in Europe and therefore paved the way for a fully, flourishing of a Christianized Europe, which then paved the way for the civilization we have today. So maybe no Crusades, no modern liberal society. So then it's okay.
On the flip side, those Islamic societies were more advanced than the European ones when it came to things like science and mathematics.
Yeah, I know, but we'd all be. Yeah, but we wouldn't have cathedrals. We'd have mosques everywhere through Europe. Sky, is that what you want, Sky Jatani?
I am not interested in the culture war framing of things. As much as I said I'm grateful to live in a society and a culture that's been deeply influenced by Christian values, I have also been to Islamic societies that are more progressive than, the extreme Wahhabi Islam that you might find in certain parts of Saudi Arabia. Like, there are places in this world where Islam is the dominant religion and women have rights. It's not unheard of. So, yeah, I just don't want to get into the war of everything Christian is automatically good and everything Islamic is automatically bad. And that's not helpful.
Caitlin.
But
and that logic is exactly the kind of thing we've been talking about would be a really un-Christian way of approaching challenges here and now. Like the idea that, you could justify anything if the end result is like a more ostensibly Christian society. That's exactly what I'm afraid of happening now.
The church thrives. And by thrive, I mean builds more buildings in more cities and has attendance.
But I do think this is the challenge for us, is not just, as Mike Bird said, to be weird when it's actually kind of hard to be weird. People think they know what Christianity is. They have maybe some stereotypical ideas. There's this amazing Dorothy Sayers essay, The Doctrine is the Dogma. No, the Dogma is the Drama is the essay. But it's a great essay because she's writing to a culture, right? It's a ways back in history, but it's a British culture that was even kind of earlier than America in terms of being less religious. And she's saying, actually, this is the most amazing thing that we have. Like the basic facts of Christian doctrine are surprising. And if actually you showed them to people, they don't believe you. She has this great line where she's like, they don't not believe them because they don't believe them. They don't believe that's what Christianity teaches. You have to actually just say like, no, actually Christianity teaches this wild thing. And I do think that's a challenge. But the other challenge is the fact that we have created as a larger Christian tradition, such good gifts that people are recognizing now in terms of the political gifts and kind of social norms that Christianity has gifted the world. And to your point about this Crusades debate, we have gifted real weapons and threats. Like we have given things that were not good gifts. They were harmful. And the challenge now is that we can't go back to this early Christianity where we were the kind of strange ones who were giving these good gifts and being persecuted by the ones that were dehumanizing people. We have a really mixed history now, and we have to grapple with both ends of that. And both the cultural Christians and the non-cultural Christians sometimes don't want to take seriously that we bring both good gifts and we leave a trail of real devastation behind too.
But can't we just say the bad stuff was other people's faults and the good stuff is what we true Christians were doing?
Nope.
Okay. And the other thing I want to correct is I don't like the term cultural Christianity.
Of course you don't.
Because What does that mean? It's just a,
Someone else came up with it.
Did you mean to say that out loud, Caitlin? I'm wondering
seriously.
if you meant to say that out loud. Of course you don't.
Tell us why you don't, Sky. Why do you
Sky.
not?
well, because I don't think it correctly identifies the problem with it. I think a better label would be, let's just call it cultural prosperity gospel. Because that's what we're saying. The prosperity gospel says, I don't really want Jesus. I want the benefits of Jesus. I want health and wealth and prosperity and a good family and a great job and all those things. I want the fruit and benefits of my faith. I don't actually care if Jesus is just a means to an end. And what cultural prosperity gospel says is, I want my culture to be compassionate and kind and equitable and full of human rights and all these other benefits, but I don't really want Jesus. And if I can get those things without Jesus, I'd be happy to get them without Jesus. But if I have to have Jesus to get those things, fine, he can come along, but I'm not here for him.
I will pretend that I'm okay with that guy.
Exactly. It's the prosperity gospel on a cultural or societal level. That's what we're talking about. And most of us, hopefully a lot of people listening to this would realize, oh yeah, prosperity gospel is not really the message of Jesus. Like, a lot of people benefited from the things he did. He cared for them. He loved them. He resurrected them. He blessed them. He cured them. He fed them. He did all these things. But in John chapter 6, he turns to the crowds and says to them, all right, I'm done with the miracles. Now, who actually wants to follow me? Who will eat my flesh and drink my blood? And it says everyone left except for the 12. And that was his way, I think, of thinning the herd and going, you've all been coming because of all the benefits you were getting from me, but you've been around long enough. Do you actually want me? And what these cultural Christians or these cultural prosperity gospel people are saying is, we want all the benefits of Jesus, but we don't really care about him. And the true church needs to stand up and say, I'm glad you've gotten all these benefits, but we're going to keep putting Jesus in front of you and help you realize that these benefits are not the gospel, and they are not why the church is here. We are here to be representatives of Jesus Christ and his kingdom, and we're inviting you to him. And that is the only way to sustain these things, not just in this world, but world without end.
Okay. So Caitlin has something to say, and she's skeptical. She's partway with you, but maybe not all the way with you. She still wants to go back and say, of course you do.
I agree with you, Sky. I also think that describes some people. I think for other people, they want Jesus, but they just want good teacher Jesus. Like, they just want, like, he gave the world some good gifts of ways to live. It's the supernatural part. It's the weird part that is...
Right. I'm saying, if you want Jesus, you want the resurrected Jesus. You want the living Jesus, not just the teacher from, 2,000 years ago.
Right. But that's been true. I mean, this has been a struggle within American Christianity for basically our entire history, that there is a group of people, and where they fall on the political spectrum very much changes. Like, early 20th century, there were lots of Christians that said, we just need the Sermon on the Mount Jesus to tell us to build hospitals and to take care of orphans and to, support labor unions. And we don't need the supernatural stuff. And in fact, that's the part that's off-putting. But I love what you said about this story with Jesus saying, like, thinning the crowd by saying this weird thing about eating my body and drinking my blood, because I think that that's a much more practical response to this story for people who are like, I don't have a lot of power over these larger cultural dynamics of Christianity and how it's being employed. But I can also, with my family, with my neighborhood, with my church, with the people I talk to, resist this impulse that's been pretty, has grown in us over especially the last couple hundred years, to say, just start with the nice teaching and kind of hide the weird stuff in a corner and eventually introduce them to it. But I appreciate the churches that are like, no, we're going to just say we're doing weird stuff and we believe weird stuff. Yep. And I just a few months ago at my church, the third, fourth, and fifth grade girls were learning about communion. And one of them specifically said, she was like, I didn't know church was so weird. And I was like, yeah, we need to be teaching people this is really weird. We do weird stuff. And I think we've talked about this on the show before, but I think increasingly there will be people for whom that actually is the most attractive part, because they're actually really tired of living in a world that everyone is telling them to pretend this is all there is. And they have this innate sense that there's more going on. And finally, there is a community of people willing to say, there is more going on. And actually, we don't just tell these weird stories. We actually really deeply believe them, and they shape how we live. And they give us reason to risk things in our life and to sacrifice on behalf of other people and to belong to one another more deeply and truly.
Yeah, I've been thinking more lately. I just read a book about the friendship of Tolkien and Lewis, and also their development of mythology. Tolkien.
I just got that book on your recommendation, Phil.
Yeah,
Check
it's
it out.
really good. It's a graphic novel, novel biography of Tolkien and Lewis and their friendship by John
Hendricks.
Right, John Hendricks.
It's called The Mythmakers.
Yeah, and it just reminded me really deeply of the notion of an enchanted world, and particularly in Lewis's own journey where he had gone into atheism, but he was such kind of a romantic at his core and loved Norse folk tales and mythology, and loved the idea of a world that was more than it appeared. And it was such a homecoming for him to kind of surrender to the idea that Christianity describes that world and that it might actually be the world we live in. It was a homecoming to his childhood of that was the world I longed for when I was a kid, and then I gave up on, when I was 19, 20, 21 and went to World War I and sat in the trenches and, got shelled by the Germans and completely lost hope in that kind of a world. And his friendship with Tolkien and their long walks and conversations about mythology and can there be a true myth, and what do you look for, truth in mythology, or do you look for meaning in mythology, and then the Bible and the story of Jesus, and it all came together. And I just feel like rather than just saying, hey, we drink a dead guy's blood, which was what led the Romans to say, I think they're cannibals. I think these new Christians are cannibals. Just the whole story, paint the whole picture of, I actually believe this. This isn't just something, that was in songs that we kind of sing, but I am actually living as if this were true.
Right. It reminds me, Jonathan Haidt has talked about in The Righteous Mind, why do we believe the things we believe and how do we change our beliefs? And it begins with, you end up believing the thing that you want to be true. You want this to be the world that is truly enchanted. There is magic in this world. And I think there's a lot of people for whom the world has been disenchanted, and they do hunger for that magic again. They want to believe that there's more to this world than just the material reality that we encounter and the appetites and desires that are fed to us all the time through media and advertising. They want to believe there's something deeper to it. And when we hide that aspect of our faith, we are depriving people and their spirits of what they're craving the most. And I think the whole seeker-driven church movement that was done with good intentions back in the 80s and 90s was basically a way of saying, let's take all the weird stuff of Christianity and kind of put it in the back closet. Yeah. And not make it weird anymore, so more people will come in. And I think there's a generation now going, no, please, can we bring the weirdness out of the closet and just put it out front? And in many fronts, not just communion or liturgy or symbolism, but even the weirdness of our sexual ethic, the weirdness of our view of history, the weirdness of how we think about the unseen world. All that weirdness is it's attractive to people. And they're either going to be attracted to the weirdness that's actually in Scripture or some kind of heretical weirdness that's going to lead them astray.
I can make more money off the heretical weirdness because I can copyright it.
Fair enough.
I can't copyright the weirdness in Scripture. And I'm not saying that for myself. I was playing a role of a person who might do that. That was a role play. Thank you okay. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening in. Let's re-enchant the world. I was going to say be a little more weird, but it's just too easy.
Let's be a little more weird.
We can be a little more weird, but that,
Both of those have some challenges. You can disenchant the world in a way that's not good, and you can be weird in a way that's not good, but both could be good.
Re-enchant the world.
Re-enchant the world.
That's not good. Yeah, you are correct. Okay. I think it's impossible to disenchant the world without ourselves becoming disenchanted. I'll leave you with that thought. Discuss amongst yourselves after we're gone. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for supporting us. Go to HOLYPOST.com. Check out all the new stuff. We got a live show this Saturday in Chicago. Look it up on HOLYPOST.com. I assume there's something there you can find if you want to come down and see it. It's going to be great. Sky's going to wear 20 different hats. And perform a special dance he's composed for the evening. Okay, we'll see you next time. The Holy Post is sponsored by Faithful Counseling. I'm not super good at people stuff. I like ideas and technology and puppets. When Lisa and I got married, it was a shock to see just how different we approach the world and each other. The thoughtful gift of marriage counseling from one of our parents was a huge help in those early years. Faithful Counseling can help you get through life's rough spots. With more than 3,000 licensed therapists across all 50 states, Faithful Counseling makes it easy to find a great therapist that'll work for you. You can meet over video or phone sessions, and changing therapists is easy and free until you find the right fit. So don't struggle alone. Let Faithful Counseling match you with a licensed therapist who can help you grow into the best version of yourself. Visit faithfulcounseling.com/holypost and get the professional, faith-based counseling you need. And there's a special offer for our listeners. Right now, you can get 10% off your first month at faithfulcounseling.com/holypost. Thanks again to Faithful Counseling for sponsoring this episode. The Holy Post is sponsored by the National Association of Evangelicals. Do you feel the tension in the air? Maybe it's at the dinner table or in your church or just anytime you hop on social media. In our increasingly divided country, disagreement has become hostility. So what's the role for Christians in this moment? How do we heal rifts and wrestle with complicated topics in a world that feels increasingly divided into sides and prefers simple sound bites over thoughtful engagement? The Difficult Conversations podcast, hosted by Walter Kim, president of the National Association of Evangelicals, shares incredible stories of people who have stepped out of safe circles, sometimes into enemy territory, to build bridges and repair relationships. You'll hear from experts on why difficult conversations are so hard, how to have them, and why they matter for the kingdom of God. In the first episode, Jonathan Haidt, one of the world's foremost thinkers in social psychology, starts at the beginning and helps us understand why we are just so polarized. Look for the Difficult Conversations podcast on your favorite podcast app.
My guest today is no stranger to the Holy Post. Kristen Kobes Du Mez is a professor of history at Calvin University, and she made a big splash with her best-selling book in 2021, Jesus and John Wayne: How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. I found the book so illuminating that we ended up doing our very first Holy Post podcast sub-series with Kristen about the book. You can still find those 4 special episodes at holypost.com. Today she's back to talk about her newest project, a documentary film called For Our Daughters. It's directed by Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Carl Biker, and goes deeper into some of the themes from Jesus and John Wayne, especially the sexual abuse scandal and cover-up that has rocked the evangelical church in recent years. Kobes says that the beliefs and culture that created that scandal and covered it up are directly linked to the political idolatry that we now see spreading all over the evangelical church in America. The film is currently on YouTube. It's only 30 minutes and it's available for free. So we've linked to it in the show notes, and I really recommend everyone watch it and hopefully discuss it with a church group or small group that you're a part of. Here is my conversation with Kristen Kobes Du Mez. Kristen Kobes Du Mez, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Thank you. It's so good to be back.
It's been a long journey since Jesus and John Wayne came out. You've certainly been on a roller coaster. The latest dip or dive or twist in this ride is the new film that you've created that's out on YouTube called For Our Daughters. What was the genesis of this? How did you go from Jesus and John Wayne to doing a YouTube film about the sexual abuse scandal in the church?
The film is inspired by the last chapter of Jesus and John Wayne. And when I wrote Jesus and John Wayne, when I researched that book, I did not intend to focus on abuse. It actually wasn't on my radar, really, when I first began that research years earlier. But what I saw over and over again was some of the pastors who were promoting this kind of militant Christian manhood were becoming implicated in abuse scandals, abuse of power, sexual abuse, either directly as perpetrators or supporting their friends who were perpetrators. And so I just was keeping tabs on that. And when it came time to write Jesus and John Wayne, I knew that needed to be a part of this story. And that's how it ended up in the last chapter of the book. You know, what does this look like for women? What does this model of power look like, the dark side of it? Where this film came from, then, I was approached by director Carl Biker, who was interested in doing a project on Jesus and John Wayne. And if you know much about the documentary film world, things can be quite fluid there. And so we weren't quite sure, is this going to be a limited series? Is this going to be a feature documentary? Where would we focus? And he said, well, let's just start getting some footage. And he wanted to start with some of the women's voices. And very quickly, when we heard these women's stories in their own words, we were so blown away by the power of their stories and how clear they were about what had happened to them and how important it was to get this out to wider audiences. And knowing that the broader project was going to take a very long time, we thought we could do something a little quicker on this and get their stories out and then go back and do maybe a bigger project.
Okay, so obviously nobody listening to this is probably unfamiliar with the scandal that has rocked not just the Southern Baptist Convention, but many churches around the country. But you do a couple of things in this film which aren't surprising exactly, but you make some connections that I think might be surprising for people. So let me talk about a couple of them. Let's start with this. A lot of people know that there's been this awful abuse of women and girls that has gone on in churches for a long time. A lot of people know that there was cover-ups, that pastors and church leaders and elders were protected, were shuffled around between different churches, that these things were kind of swept under the rug and buried. What some people might be surprised by is that when some of these stories did come to light, and when some of these abusers confessed what had happened, they were met with applause, standing ovations, and admiration. Talk about that part of the story and how it fits into this bigger narrative of abuse of male power that you're telling.
Yeah, I will say too that has been some of the most jarring footage from the film and in the interviews. I think that was what most, I was familiar with these stories because I've written about them. I followed these stories for a very long time. And I was still moved when I heard them firsthand. But our director, cinematographer, people in the room were absolutely blown away to hear their stories. And particularly, there are predators anywhere, and churches are soft targets. And there's always bad guys. So abuse is going to happen. But what is so stunning in so many of these cases, and this is a pattern that I uncovered in the research for Jesus and John Wayne, what is so stunning is the way the good people in the church, the bystanders, the church leaders end up over and over again defending the perpetrator and blaming the victim and pushing her and her family out of the church. And, that's a question that demands an explanation. What is it inside these churches? What is it inside these cultures? What kind of a theology sets this up to happen over and over again?
Okay, so answer your question, Kristen. What is it? What is the theology and the culture of these places that allows abusers to be celebrated, protected, and victims and their families demonized and pushed out?
There are many layers to that. Rachel Denhollander is in the film, and she addresses this with great clarity in terms of a theology of sexuality, coming out of predating purity culture, but part of purity culture. This idea that men and women are extremely different, and that God filled men with testosterone, and they have such enormous sexual drives, and they aren't great with restraint, and boys will be boys. And so it's on women to protect purity. And so a woman who is not married cannot tempt or should not tempt a man. And a woman who is married has to fulfill her husband's every sexual need. What this framework sets up is anytime there is sexual misconduct or assault, there is always a woman to blame. And there are cases where even young girls are blamed for seducing their abusers, seducing their own fathers. And a wife is blamed when she knew nothing about what was going on because clearly she wasn't meeting her husband's needs. So we had to go out there. Right? This is shocking. And when I came across stories like this in Jesus and John Wayne, at first I set them aside because it just seemed these have to be outliers, right? And then I came across more and more of them. And then you have to go to the theology, you have to go to the teachings. So there's that kind of core. And then there's the teachings more generally of authority and submission.
Mm-hmm.
And, is ingrained in these girls that you are to obey, you are to submit to the men in your life, to your pastor, certainly. And so many of these girls don't even have the language or even the framework to identify what happened to them as abuse, right? And then you also have this strong tendency to, among members of the church, to quote unquote, protect the witness of the church. Right. That protect this man's ministry. Don't air our dirty laundry. And I think that impulse then comes to play as well. And it doesn't just spring up organically, right? This is what they're being taught by those with power who are trying to protect their power. And so you have a lot of cover up that is done, supposedly in the name of protecting the bride of Christ. When in fact, it's doing exactly the opposite. And so you have all of those layers coming together in each of these situations.
Yeah, I concur completely. It reminds me, I had a conversation with Nancy French about the reporting she did on Kanakuk camps and the cover-ups there. And a lot of it was driven by, well, we're doing so much good as a ministry. There's so much positive impact that's happening. And if these stories came out, it would risk the entire ministry. Therefore, circle the wagons, protect the ministry, protect the witness of the church. There's another aspect of this, though, that I wonder may be going on. Jules Woodson, who's featured in your film, talks about the abuse that she experienced when she was a minor. She was a high school student, and her youth pastor had engaged in inappropriate behavior with her. It was hidden for many years. I forget his name, but when he came out and confessed this in front of his future church, that's when they stood and applauded and gave him this. I wonder if part of it is also, and I've seen this since the time I was a teenager, on the male side of it, is it was just kind of driven into me from the time I was a teenager onward in the church, that sexual temptation is this never-ending assault on men. Right. We are victims of this culture of sexual promiscuity, of pornography, of all of these things that are surrounding us all the time. And invariably, we are going to succumb to that in some form or another in different ways. And there's this posture, well-meaning perhaps initially, that those things should be met with grace. That when you succumb to this, there's forgiveness, there's restoration, there's care from God and his people and all that. And so when a pastor gets up and says, yeah, I transgressed a sexual boundary with a student who was under my care, the immediate instinct of a lot of men is, oh, I can relate. Yeah, sexual temptation is terrible. We're all weak. And good for you. That took courage to confess that. And we're going to. And what gets completely eclipsed in that is there was a victim here.
Yes, exactly.
Right? That just gets blown past because there's so much empathy for the supposed victimhood of the man caught in that situation that we forget there was a minor, there was a girl who was a victim here. And that, whether it's intentional or a sin of omission, it just gets completely forgotten because there's so much about the poor victimhood of men in this sexualized culture.
Yep, these men's accountability groups. I know exactly what you're talking about. And the idea, yes, that there are so many temptations out there and that women become dehumanized into like they're just seductresses, or they're just not even that. There's a source of temptation, any woman, any girl, right? And yes, then so much grace and so much affirmation and very, very cheap forgiveness. And then the man is restored to his authority, which is not biblical. And what it does is it sets this up to keep happening. The case of Tiffany Thigpen in the film is absolutely horrifying on this front. He goes on to have dozens of additional victims, young girls. And it's only years later when Tiffany reads about a case being brought, or not even a case being brought yet, but a case that surfaces with 2 young victims. And she reaches out and says, like, are you going to press charges? And the prosecutor said, these girls are too young. They can't handle going up against a man with this much power behind him. And she said, okay, put me in, right? I'll do it. that drew her in. But otherwise, you have repeat offenders because the forgiveness is so quick and easy. And if it even does surface publicly, in many cases it doesn't, but when it does, right, quick affirmation, applause, and or move him along to another church where he has free reign to do it all over again.
So obviously, since many of these stories really came to light during the Me Too and the Church Too movement, there have been new developments. The SBC has taken significant steps in uncovering more of this. There's been votes. There's been a lot of, argument and disunity around it. But there's a lot more that's happened. Are you hopeful that we are past the worst of this and that bringing light to all of this abuse and cover-up is setting us on a new trajectory? Or do you think we're stuck in this pattern?
I'm not hopeful yet. I was watching very closely with the SBC investigation and report, and I know there was a lot of celebration when that report was issued, and it did uncover patterns of abuse. And I have to admit that even in that moment, I wrote a thread on Twitter saying, let's wait and see. Because the truth is, yes, Me Too helped surface these, but I was researching this before Me Too. I was uncovering these stories right long before the SBC report published. If you cared, you could find this information. It was out there. And so clearly the people who needed to care didn't. And people had this information inside the SBC and they were doing nothing with it. They were making sure it didn't get out so that they wouldn't be, have liability issues. And so am I hopeful now? No, I'm less hopeful now than when I wrote that thread because I still had some hope. Let's wait and see. But I do know, a lot of people who had power to do something did know these things and didn't do it. So let's see what they do now. We're not very far ahead at all. And in fact, because so much time has gone by without any significant changes inside the SBC to speak of, I think some of that hope is slipping away. I don't think that I know that we have not even begun to reckon with the scale of the abuse and to understand those dynamics. Because I will say, when you do a piece like this, or even the chapter that I had in Jesus and John Wayne, when you address this, when you cover it, when you take it seriously, you'll hear stories. So many stories. My inbox is filling with stories from women saying, this happened to me. I left, I'm an atheist now, or I left the church, or so many of those. I just got a stunning letter from a dad this morning saying, I just watched your film. Thank you so much. And he told just harrowing stories of the things that happened to both his daughters in Christian spaces, in Christian organizations. This is just the very tip of the iceberg. And I will say that for the film For Our Daughters, I went with the women that I asked to participate are some of the most prominent survivors in the space, and most happen to be a part of the SBC. So SBC takes center stage. That's in part because this has been vetted and because they do have prominent voices. But the first woman speaking in the film is actually not from the SBC. Her family, her dad came under the influence of Doug Wilson, pulled the kids out of school, moved the family to an isolated location, and raised her as a stay-at-home daughter. Right. So this isn't just SBC, it spreads beyond. But the reason I went for some of the most prominent survivors is because that was a moral choice, actually. Because I know what comes at survivors who speak out, and it is vicious in that space. It is absolutely vicious. And I did not want to take a survivor, even if she wanted to speak into this and put her on this kind of a public stage, because even if you tell yourself what it's going to be like, there's no way to really understand. And it is devastating, the viciousness that comes at survivors. And so I needed to invite women who knew exactly what they were saying yes to, or at least I felt a need to do that. And who took it on knowing full well, what some of the consequences might be. And that's why we ended up with some familiar names, women who have powerful stories. And also because they've been in this game for a while, advocating for reform, they have a really deep understanding of these issues, and they bring such clarity in this film.
I mean, that's one of the pieces that you don't highlight this in the film, but I'm glad you just mentioned it. we don't appreciate what these women face after they go public. And I mean, I have experienced a tiny infinitesimal bit of the blowback for things we do on this show. And then people have gone after me, they've gone after my family, and I cannot begin to imagine what these women have faced and the courage and perseverance it takes for them to continue to advocate in the public square, online, in films like yours for what they're doing. It's just a supernatural amount of strength that requires.
The financial costs, the emotional costs, the security, right, risks, all of these things are very real. And these women are taking that on for what? They have been doing this for years, advocating, and they continue. There are smear campaigns against them, and there are all sorts of allegations thrown at them. And what I will say is their words here are true. They have been thoroughly vetted. And again, for this film, right? We don't just put this stuff out there without thorough legal vetting, fact checking, all of this. This is true, right? What they are saying is true. And we have to sit with that. And it is on us to make sure this doesn't keep happening.
Okay. Apart from not having a great deal of hope on the structural accountability,
sorry,
that we would all, no, I get it. Do you see evidence that the underlying culture or theology that you think contributed to this kind of abuse is shifting? That's not coming from the top down, perhaps, but from the bottom up. Is that changing? Are you seeing evidence that a younger generation is stepping into more influence and leadership in the American church and is advocating for models and structures and culture or values that might make it less likely that these abuse scandals continue to flourish in the future?
Yeah, also no. I'm also sorry.
Also no.
Also no. I mean, I'm not really seeing a lot of new leadership. I'm not seeing what I'm seeing is some brave voices who do have a certain amount of power inside some of these structures who speak out, and then they're out of a job, or they go quiet. One of the two. Generationally, I'm seeing more people leave the church than really work to reform and to bring that change. Or I should say, those who are working to reform and bring change have not yet reached the level where they have created new systems and changed the culture. I have not seen that. I would love to have something more positive to report. Where I do see change is in the public accountability. Right? Social media, a double-edged sword here.
Yeah, for sure.
It's also a conduit for a lot of attacks that get lobbed at these women, a lot of the viciousness. But one thing it does do is it means that any woman can break a story now and can expose what's happened and can find other survivors, can find support, can find people who will take her seriously and people who will, help investigate. Help vet, help step in. There are organizations now that do this. And so survivors can be put in touch with them. So that silence is much, much harder to keep. Whereas for generations, that was default. And even if a woman would say something in her community, right, drop in the bucket, she and her family move away and the man can do what he's doing. Social media, right, there's some accountability, and we see that now. A week or two ago, we had, it seems like in Texas, a new case breaking every single day. And then attention. And then what happens is other women who have stories about that perpetrator can weigh in, and then suddenly you can start to build a case. Because otherwise, so much of this is he said, she said, and the power differentials and so on. So what has really changed is the means of accountability and source of connection and solidarity in the survivor community.
Right. In the time we have left, I want to turn to an aspect of the film that people may not expect. And you do this in your book, but it comes across in the film too. And that is the link between this culture of patriarchal dominance and abuse of power, including sexual abuse, and what we see on the extreme right in the MAGA movement and even Donald Trump. You and I had a conversation many years ago about Jesus and John Wayne. We did that whole sub-series here at the Holy Post. It's still on our website. People can go get it. But we recognize that there's a link between the pattern you see in these sexual abuse scandals in the church. A man who feels justified in abusing a woman or a girl. And then when it comes out, he is celebrated, she is ostracized, and essentially a posture of, well, he couldn't help it and she had it coming is kind of the attitude. A link between that and what we saw on January 6th, 2021, which was the MAGA movement led by Donald Trump assaults the Capitol, assaults democracy, assaults the certification of the election in violent ways. And the attitude afterwards was, well, America had it coming. Democracy had it coming because she wasn't doing what the male leaders wanted. And what did you expect? And now there is this circling around Donald Trump and elevating him and celebrating him. And it wasn't that big a deal. And let's just move on and let's get over it and quit talking about it. It's unbelievable how it looks exactly the same. Explain to me the cultural or theological link between those two phenomenon that we've been watching.
I mean, to me, it ultimately comes down to an understanding of power, what power is and what it's for. And so the film actually wraps up with the words of both Rachel Denhollander and Len Vanderzee, a pastor who happens to be my own pastor. So he's not a household name, but thinking about how is it that this Christianity is so different from the Christianity that I embraced, and I just thought, well, this guy's responsible for that. He was my pastor when I was a grad student during really formative years. And now he's the pastor at my home church here in Michigan. And so I asked him to speak. And this is the kind of thing I hear in sermons all the time, every week, about Jesus and his understanding of power. Jesus did not seek power over, kind of coercive power or worldly understandings of power. In fact, that was the temptation of Christ. And he rejected that. Instead, he divested of power. He offered himself as a living sacrifice and says, if you want to follow me, you take up your cross and you follow. It is the complete opposite to what we see, this kind of Christian nationalist understanding of, oh, you need power to protect Christianity. You have to protect God. The ends justify the means in that framework. And when you then conflate your desires with God's will, then, you can always justify anything because there's always a greater cause. Protect the church, sweep this under the rug, throw victims under the bus, doesn't matter because you have a greater good. It's that same mentality. So there's that level of kind of parallel. But I will also say there are specific ties between the men who are preaching this sort of militant patriarchy, rigid patriarchy, and members of the former Trump administration and those who hope to be in the next Trump administration. And you can see those ties in the document Project 2025. You can see these connections. Self-proclaimed Christian nationalist Russ Vought, and he's connected to these networks there. You just see these thickening networks, people like Doug Wilson and Joel Webbin, and, these voices that are featured here. These are not just, weird preacher guys out in Idaho or in Texas or, that are just doing their thing in their own isolated spaces, which is bad enough. These guys are part of a network that is connected to the very centers of the MAGA world. And this is the plan that is essentially waiting for a Trump victory to be put into place. And you can read Project 25, and there's this line that really jumped out at me, that our founding fathers in the Constitution guaranteed Americans the right to do what we ought to do, not what we want to do, right? So who decides what Americans ought to do? Well, they'll tell you what you ought to do. They'll tell you God's law for you, and they'll tell women what God's law is for them, right? And it's this patriarchal, hierarchical order. And it demands obedience, and it will coerce that. So that's what I see, and I spend my days studying and tracking. And that's the framework for this film, because we thought it was important for the women who had lived in those spaces to tell others inside those spaces and outside those spaces. And as Krista Brown says, she doesn't want those men taking over the country because she's lived it, and it was bloody awful.
Right. We're getting close to the election, about a month away, when, at least as we're recording this. And There's a pretty good chance that we may have a female president for the first time come January. Back when Barack Obama was elected in 2018, there was a lot of celebration around the fact that America had its first African-American president. A lot of people never thought they would live to see that day. There was a sense of, there was talk of being a post-racial America, and, we've healed all of our racial wounds and prejudices and stuff. Obviously, that did not prove to be the case. There was a sort of backlash to the fact that we had a Black man in the White House. And you saw some of the ugliness that came out on certain sides of the political spectrum and in different subcultures within America. If we have a woman president come 2025, what do you think some of the backlash might look like from the folks that you've mentioned and some of the sectors of the church that are highly patriarchal, not just in culture, but in theology? What do you think their reaction might be?
Oh man, you're not really pitching me questions to get the hopeful answers here, Sky. So let me see. Let me, the dark future that is in store, best case scenario. So let me think here. We're already seeing some in some of these spaces, especially more the charismatic spaces, where she's the Jezebel spirit. Right? I'm getting calls from journalists now. What's the Jezebel spirit? And it's not good. It's not good. So it's this idea that's a literal kind of demonic spirit in Kamala Harris, and I think that's an interesting question because yes, there was backlash. I feel like the backlash will be less noticeable simply because the gendered backlash, because there's already built in whoever the Democratic candidate was going to be. We already have, such heightened polarization right now. And you already have the refusal to accept the results of the 2020 election and all of the seeds being planted,
Right.
very clearly that Trump will not accept anything but a win in November. And, all of that is just being planned and out in the open. And so the fact that the Democratic candidate is a woman, I would put that somewhere down on the list in terms of, what we're going to be seeing. But it's always significant too. And so I guess, I don't know what specific shape it will take. I think it may I don't think it would necessarily be the source of the backlash, but it will give a flavor to that backlash. I think on the Democratic side, too, you'll probably notice a real difference between when Hillary Clinton campaigned, where she really put her gender front and center. That didn't work out so well for her. And I think in this election in particular, for Democrats, too, they've got other issues on their mind. First and foremost, saving democracy. And so whoever that candidate is, that is their primary role, not being, a role model for young girls, although that's awesome, too. And not even being, this first female president. Like we'll celebrate that down the road, whatever. Right now in Democratic spaces, I think so much focus is simply on preserving that democracy and keeping something like Project 2025 with its power grab from being implemented.
Yeah, I concur. I suspect that if Kamala Harris becomes the president, with any president, any administration, there are obviously going to be things that you disagree with or criticisms or failures or mistakes that are made. But in her case, I suspect her critics are going to attach those criticisms or those errors or the mistakes to her gender. And it's not simply going to be President Harris made a bad decision here or President Harris chose the wrong policy there. It's because she's a woman that she didn't get this right. It's because she's a woman that outcome was the way it was. And that's going to be really gross. And that's what I'm not looking forward to.
And inevitable. Yes.
And inevitable. I agree. But we're not there yet. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But I agree. If Trump does not win the election, it's going to be really ugly. And for many reasons. Well, Kristen, I guess I don't have you on the show because I'm looking for sunshine and rainbows and optimism. But you do give us a sober look at the reality of things. Max Dupree said the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality, which means having the courage to look at it and admit it and shine a light on it. And that is certainly what your film does. So I really encourage everyone to go watch it. It's available on YouTube. So You don't have to pay for it. It's just there. And what is it, half an hour roughly?
It is just half an hour, and all of these choices were deliberate. We want to make it short enough for you to watch it in groups, watch it in your church group, watch it with friends, and then talk about it. And yeah, we worked really hard to make it free. So it's not on a streaming platform because we wanted zero barriers. So anybody who wants to see it, any woman, wherever you find yourself situated, you have access to it.
Yeah, we will link to it in the show notes. I watched the whole thing. It is well worth the time. And I highly recommend watching it in a group and having a conversation about it because it's just so important. Kristen, thank you for producing that. Thank you for the work you've done in your scholarship and your advocacy for these things, which is so important. Grateful to have you back. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Sky.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much, much more.